Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, in this series on the network of global corporate control. Today's show is pre-recorded and is called Peaceful Transition. Thanks, as always, to Maurice Jackson, studio producer and director, Cruchet Starnes, audio and teleprompter, and he's volunteering for us today, and so is Dolores Harris, floor director. I began this series after many years of trying to deal with the mainstream media. Working in the World Bank's legal department, where I fought the deepest corruption in the world's financial system for 21 years, was another way of preparing to represent all of the world's people as the Overseer Mandate Trustee for the trust containing the world's monetary gold reserves and other wealth. Last week's segment was called Humanity's Legacy. As the lawyer for the beneficiaries of this legacy, I described my relationship with the banking cartel and with the other corrupt groups trying to steal the world's wealth that José Rizal placed in trust for all of humanity. I also began to describe how the different parties were interacting with each other. I made the point that nobody was denying who I was and what my job was. This is a strong statement when you realize that I publish for everyone to see whatever I send by snail mail and email directly to the various parties, including to the embassies and board members. I'll describe a document that I've put at the end of the teleprompter today. It was in a tweet on July 1, 2015, and it describes what happened after an executive director on the board admitted me to the World Bank and the security guards owned by the banking cartel refused to admit me. It also describes a hearing I attended on the corrupt business environment in the District of Columbia. Another document that I put in the teleprompter was an offer from a man I'm calling Ralph, who happens to own some of the Treaty of Versailles bonds that we're using to bankrupt the bankers. Ralph is offering to use his bonds to pay for Greece's debt. Peter Steck was the executive director for the Netherlands on the board of executive directors. He chaired the World Bank's audit committee for the board. And I'll read you an email that Peter Steck sent to me on the 23rd of April, 2010. Subject, Ray, the World Bank's internal controls. And I had put a workshop together for the annual meetings in the Hay Adams Hotel. And I invited Peter Steck, and he wrote to me, "You are one brave lady. Other adjectives might be used by other persons." As I began to uncover the corruption in the highest layers of the international financial system, many people got intimidated. And the tweet continues, "I didn't stop uncovering the rot. I will not be intimidated. The end result is that we are cleaning up the mess, all of us." What we're talking about is a peaceful transition because it's clear from José Rizal's legacy that we discussed in last week's segment that the world's wealth is owned by humanity. This wealth is in a trust that is administered by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. It's called the Global Debt Facility. Meanwhile, the banking cartel is trying to steal the world's gold in the Global Debt Facility. The banking cartel is no longer using its agents in these discussions because they don't want to admit that there is a Global Debt Facility or that the World Bank and IMF Board of Governors administer it. The discussions about this serious topic are also carried on in my social media and in the comments section on YouTube. The position of the banking cartel is stated in the YouTube archives for the DCTV series, this series. And the people that are making these comments in YouTube are CIA operatives and sock puppets. That means they're not real people. They're just fake comments. The claims are outlandish. I'll read you one comment from a CIA operative or sock puppet named Mary Kai, that the world's wealth is owned by the bankers and not by humanity. And this is what she wrote. You claim now that World Bank somehow got their claws on the BIS, that means Bank for International Settlement, accounts after the disappearance of Adnan Sakli. The BIS doesn't own the world's monetary gold reserves. Neither does any central bank. Actually, at the conference founding the World Bank and International Monetary Fund in 1944, the delegates voted to close down the Bank for International Settlements. I reported this very important fact in the DCTV segment on July 10th, and I'm going to repeat it again. The July 10th episode is called Closing the Bank for International Settlements. The Bank for International Settlements, or BIS, is the name of the group of central banks who print your paper money and who are responsible for much of the world's corruption. In an early DCTV episode, I told you that the conference that began the World Bank and IMF in 1944 voted to close the Bank for International Settlements. That is what we, together with the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF, are now doing. I got my information about how the conference that began the World Bank and IMF voted to close the BIS from Valentin Katsanov, who's an eminent Russian economist. Katsanov is critical of the Russian central bank. Katsanov writes about the role of gold as real money. Katsanov wrote a study dealing with new documents that confirm the organization of the Second World War by the United States and UK bankers. Katsanov has written that World War II was started by President Franklin Roosevelt and Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain in the hope of destroying the USSR. The war was not unleashed by frenzied Führer who happened to be ruling Germany at the time. World War II was a project created by a world oligarchy or Anglo-American money owners. We now call this group the Network of Global Corporate Control. We know that it's the bloodline families that go back to the times of the ancient pharaohs in Egypt that direct the Network of Global Corporate Control. This group used the United States Federal Reserve System and the Bank of England to prepare for the next world conflict of global scale right after World War I. The USSR was the target. This information comes from Katsanov. The Bretton Woods Conference, formerly known as the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, was the gathering of 730 delegates from all 44 allied nations at the Mount Washington Hotel, situated in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in the United States, to regulate the international monetary and financial order after the conclusion of World War II. This is the conference that started the World Bank and IMF. The conference was held from the 1st to the 22nd of July in 1944. All of a sudden, the issue of the Bank of International Settlements hit the agenda. It was reported that the bank collaborated with fascist Germany. Leaving many details aside, I'd only mention that with great difficulty, some U.S. delegates opposed the motion. The delegates reached an agreement to close the BIS. The decision of international conference has never been enacted. All the discreditable information related to the BIS wartime activities was classified. Today, it helps to falsify the history of the Second World War. The reason that the journalists are trying to start a conflict between the people in Russia and the people in the United States is to prevent us from finding out this truth. This information is coming out now here with us instead. The global currency reset is keeping us out of World War III. This is the only way we're going to manage to stay out of World War III. Fortunately, as time goes by, our truth is going to be accepted by everyone because it's true, because it's reality, and because the Japanese and Germans are going to protect the ability of the United States military to live up to the U.S. commitments to defend Germany and Japan. The network of global corporate control is trying to hide the truth. They won't succeed. The truth will out, and so will the wealth of the world in the global debt facility. This is the reason I'm calling this segment Peaceful Transition. Why is the fake news trying to get us mad at Russia? Maybe the Russian people have something to tell us that the bankers and the black nobility that direct the bankers don't want us to know. How about the fact that the bankers started World War II and tried to nuke us and start World War III? Or that our wealth was put into hiding for 50 years to prevent anyone from stealing it? And now we're closing down the club of the central banks who print our money, the Bank for International Settlements. Donald Trump is an imposter and a play actor. He is not the real president of the United States, and he's not its commander-in-chief. I speak for a powerful coalition that was started at the end of World War II to put the bankers and the black nobility that are trying to hide behind disinformation agents out of business. Donald Trump is not defending himself. He's trying to leave his defense solely to disinformation agents. Donald Trump can't defend himself because Donald Trump is a bankrupt liar and imposter. Trump is only backed by paper money, and Trump owes all of his properties and everything he owns to me and to the global debt facility after Trump was caught out in his lies. I'm backed by the United States gold reserves and the world's assets in the global debt facility. That is why Donald Trump and the rest of the world's countries don't contradict me. The banking cartel is responsible for most of the world corruption. The banking cartel used ultimate curse to respond to the invitation in a tweet on the 20th of July for the banking cartel to coordinate the global currency reset. And I wrote in the tweet, I'll be calling on the Institute of International Finance in order to coordinate the global currency reset. I've put this correspondence in the public eye where it will remain until the matter has been resolved. No real person can present any claims that they own the assets in the global debt facility because all claims after 50 years are invalid under the statute of limitations. By the terms of the global debt facility set out in the bilateral Mansfield Breakthrough Successor Agreement, the courts have no jurisdiction. When you look at the public record and also the archives in YouTube for this series, we actually have been discussing most of the features of the peaceful transition. Leo Freeman has told you how you can access and search the documents that I placed in the cloud on Amazon Web Services. Leo Freeman was also the person who replied to the false statement in the YouTube comment section that José Rizal was only a code name and not a real person. How to proceed during the peaceful transition, state and municipalities, exchange practices. There are many, many questions, and there are fundamental issues, many of them in how we transition during the global currency reset. States and municipalities figure in because they are building blocks. We also have the issue that Walter Burien signaled for us, the CAFRs, that's Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports. The states and municipalities are hiding their investments on the capital markets. You can find investments which include municipal bonds in the CAFRs. As I said in the 2014 email that I posted when the CIA attempted to bribe me, I am not a decision maker. Al Hodges, CMKX's lawyer, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the CIA all tried in vain to steal the world's gold. The problem is that all of humanity is going to have to organize itself on a decentralized basis from the grassroots up in order to be able to take decisions for the transition on a non-corrupt basis. And many of these decisions are going to have to be taken up front before the decisions can be taken by humanity. I've just been through this cart before the horse problem with the Board of Governors, and I had to convince them that I wasn't assuming their authority. I already have a huge position of trust because I'm voting the U.S. shares on the boards of governors and development committee and the boards of executive directors of the World Bank and IMF until the U.S. Constitution of 1789 comes back into effect. I'm attaching an email which shows you why the United States governors are not authorized to take any decisions. They forgot to tell people that they refused to give people the titles to their property and are only issuing bogus warranties of title. I've been polling people informally by using the comments section in this series. The archives can be viewed on YouTube, and I'll give you a link today when I upload this tape. The decisions shouldn't be delegated to experts because of the deep-seated corruption. YouTube is interfering with the comments. You can see that emails from the contact page on my website do get through to me, but many of the people who are sending me emails are actually agents of the banking cartel and honest people and whistleblowers who I've been working with for a long time get mind-controlled or intimidated by the threats. So I can't just delegate to them without double-checking their recommendations. We're headed to a huge bottleneck. My potential solution is to get people to try and understand what's going on in the global currency reset, to get them to try and do better, and to let them know that their performance is going to be audited at some point in the not-too-distant future by our cleansed, better selves that have actually decentralized. So while I haven't answered your question, I have indicated that you should confer with the people who are around you and attempt to come up with a good solution which is going to be looked into as we get up to speed in the global currency reset. And Roger had sent me an email in 2017 in October, and he called it reference local exchange. And he asked whether unincorporated state municipalities have exchange practices. Do you have any insight on how to? Thanks for the help, Roger. There's been a lot going on as the banking cartel tries to maintain control after it's actually lost its grip on power. I'm going to put some of the important proof in the teleprompter that we, humanity, are the ones that are in charge and not the lying, corrupt bankers. During our remaining time together, I simply want to speak to you. As I said last week, our relationship matters. And one of the relationships that I want to talk to you about is my relationship with the banking cartel. They, in the beginning, in 2013, first they sent me somebody from Taiwan who said that they were going to work with me to try to contain the disaster in Fukushima. Well, that man turned out to be just a shill. And you know what a shill is. They're an actor who's really working with somebody and doesn't want to tell you. He was working with the banking cartel. Then after that, the banking cartel sent me Wolfgang Struck, and then they sent me Ben Carlson. Now, all of these three people, I said to all of them pretty much the same thing after I realized that they were actually representing the banking cartel. I said, I'm not interested in dealing with you. I had really nothing to say to you. I want to deal with the people, because the people are the ones that own the world's assets, and we've decided that we're going to get rid of the corruption where all of our taxes they're flowing to the banking cartel. And so the banking cartel they're not, they have, all of the politicians are actually working for the banking cartel. All of the judges in the courts are actually working for the banking cartel. All of the governments, they're all associated with the banking cartel. And people are wondering, why is it that I'm able to speak freely before you now? That's because I understood all along that truth would prevail and that the bankers were lying. I was doing my job as the lawyer inside the World Bank. When I saw corruption, that's just the way I'm hardwired. I fight corruption. I just can't help it. I will not, when I see corruption, I won't back down. I can't back down. I'm just a person who, there's stuff going forward. I don't retreat. My family has frequently had to contain me because I wouldn't back down. That's what you see before you. And so as the corruption continued to escalate, I knew in 2004 from the power transition model that was developed in the National War College, I knew that there were coalitions that would be stronger than the banking cartel. And I'm working with those coalitions, and those coalitions consist of the world's military powers. Now, not the corrupt people at the top, but 70% of the troops. You can see on my Facebook page that a lot of people in the military are actually friends of mine on Facebook. And so I work with the banking cartel, telling them that I'm working with this coalition. And they don't like it, but there's nothing they can do about it. There are a lot of comments in the YouTube comment section asking me, what are we going to do if somebody rubs you out? And it's really quite simple. Humanity, which does have this coalition, will make a decision who's going to replace me. And I'm not proud. I'm happy that we've made it this far. I'd like to continue, but what I said to the Russians in their executive directors, I spoke actually with the alternative Russian executive director in 2009, and what I said was, I'm acting general counsel because you can fire me if I step out of line. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis. It's my privilege to make sure humanity keeps our wealth. Our true nature is part of our wealth. We're much more loving and peaceful than many of us know. We've been alienated from ourselves, and we've been alienated from each other. We're learning how to fix the corruption in our money, and we're taking another look at our basic relationships as well. As the truth comes into sharper focus, we have a lot to be thankful for. Peace be with you.